To kind of break it down, because there's hundreds and hundreds, well, actually thousands and thousands of international visitors and students and faculty on our campus. The breakdown is that OIS is working with primarily a CVIS population. And what that usually relates to is students who are coming here explicitly and are supported for a visa to support their studies, or exchange visitors, which are on the J-1, which can be students, but they can also be researchers. And they're in a system called CVIS. And going back to the acronyms, that's basically a government database for monitoring and tracking. So we deal with the F1 and the J-1s. Our counterparts over in human resources deal with the foreign nationals who are perhaps, or are likely, or are definitely in a more permanent position. So maybe they come here temporarily, but as they transition, or if there's potential for them to be more permanent, they do the paperwork for an H-1B visa, or an O visa, or a green card. And so there's a separation there. And that's kind of how it breaks down. So, hey, I was going to hit Okay, so just a quick overview. If we're talking about the J-1 option here, really that's the purpose. And we do have trainings for the other visa types, and you're encouraged to attend those as you see them come up. But a quick overview of the difference between the J-1 and a visitor visa, because all of you will get questions of saying, do I need a J-1? Well, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But some of the benefits of the J-1 are it allows for more of a duration. It makes dealing with payments a lot easier. And if there's any kind of an exchange of dollars between the university and a visitor, having them here on a J-1 visa makes that worth it, just to kind of navigate through that process of paying a visitor, even a reimbursement to a visitor for actual costs. The J-1 visa does give and provide support from OIS in the form of a DS 2019. Having a DS 2019 in hand makes it a lot easier for a prospective visitor to get the visa that they would need to come in to the United States in the first place, because it's much more likely that they'll get a J-1 visa than a visitor's visa if they actually have to apply for that visa at a consulate. That's not to say that you can't use a visitor's visa for short-term consultations. If they're coming to observe, then maybe the visitor's visa is appropriate. If they're coming from a country that's part of the visa waiver program, where they don't actually have to sign up for an interview at a consulate, yeah, it might be easier for them to come in on the visa waiver program, and there's not a prohibition against it. But there's some guidelines to keep in mind before you move forward with having somebody come on a visitor's visa rather than a J-1. Likewise, the H-1B, there's some overlap. The J-1 offers, for one, it has a minimum funding requirement, but that minimum funding requirement is lower than what it is for an H-1B. And the minimum funding requirement can be met by any number of sources, including personal funds. Whereas the H-1B has to meet a minimum threshold for a competitive salary that must be paid fully by NC State. So they're owned by NC State, and there's not flexibility for them to work and research and do activities elsewhere. In short, the postdoc is a great example of somebody who could go either route, either a J-1 or an H-1B. And I think of our postdocs on campus, half of them are foreign nationals. Half of that population, so 1/4 of our postdocs are on the J-1 and 1/4 are on the H-1B. And part of that depends on the negotiations between the department. If you think that this person is potential going to be more permanent and maybe have a more long-term appointment, then maybe the H-1B is more appropriate. Again, because it allows for a smoother transition to a more permanent position. So talking about the J-1 scholars, the common activities are research and observation and consultation. The question was, well, can they take classes? And I think the rule of thumb, yes, but it's their incidental activity of taking a class. If the class is really helping their research, then yeah, I think it's okay for them to take a class. Can they take an English language class? Yes, especially if improving their English is going to help their research. Can they take classes related to what they've studied already? Yes, they can. But there's also the question of, well, can they sit in on a class for free? And I think if somebody from Records and Registrations was in the room, they would say no. But, okay. The J-1 does not allow tenure track positions. So if you have somebody on a J-1 who's identified as a tenure track candidate, you actually, they can't hold that J-1 visa. So you would actually have to transition them away from the J-1 to something like the H-1B. It is temporary. There are limits on the duration. And it's not an employment visa, so you can't use it for support staff or for clerical positions. It's really for research. It's for the business of a PI and the research that that PI is doing. It could be collaboration. It could be being a key and integral part of a research team, or it could be coming in just to consult. So this page here, and again, when you go to it, if you're going to take one thing away from this presentation today, it's that URL. If you don't remember anything else, once you walk out that door, either visit this PowerPoint later or find this URL later and bookmark it. Because if you get an email from a prospective visitor and they say, hey, I've got this funding, I'd like to come, what do I do? Rather than you trying to have to rack your brain on what the next steps are, go to that URL, and it actually does go point by point. The first part is you asking these simple questions of the basic eligibility criteria for this visitor to come. In order to come as a J-1 scholar, they have to have the bachelor's degree in hand. They can't be almost done with the bachelor's degree. They have to be done with the bachelor's degree. And it even goes so far in the regulations to say that they have to have some experience. So not just the bachelor's degree and then eligible, but we usually use the bachelor's degree as the threshold.
Can you tell us what that URL is? I can't read it in the blue.
You can?
You've got blue on blue.
The blue on blue, right. It's the NCSU, the /OIS, and then /
Sorry. EDU.
Yep. OIS/faculty/dept.
EDU period?
Yeah. No. It's just a backslash. Or just a slash. OIS faculty. I'm sorry. OIS/faculty/dept, as in department, DEPT, RESP, as in responsibilities, J.php. Is there minimum funding? It's provided by any source, and for the scholar, that's $1,500 per month that they have to show in advance. If you are paying them, of course you don't have to deposit all the money in their account. It's basically the offer letter that indicates their monthly salary. There has to be an NC State supervisor, resources, and space available. And whoever's signing on as the PI is taking responsibility for making sure that there's supervision, just like there would be provided for any other employee on campus, even if they're not paid. Eligible for an HR appointment, what that means is if a PI is making an agreement with some potential visitor from overseas, the PI doesn't actually have authority to offer an NC State appointment. It has to be approved by the department head, and it has to be approved, in many cases, at the dean's level. And that's what we mean by eligible for an HR appointment, meaning the PI can't make the decision and make the offer unilaterally. The prospective's visitor's English language skills have to be assessed through a phone conversation. There's not a TOEFL requirement, but it is expected that you're going to pick up the phone and have a conversation with this prospective visitor in English. And the other question here is it suitable or most appropriate to have them come as a research scholar or using a GTN option? And part of that might be, well, what's the preference? Through GTN, they get some more services. There's a fee involved, but the fee is covering a lot of the processing responsibilities that are otherwise done as an HR function within the department. So if you would rather skip all that, and you have the choice, then the GTN option actually goes through the process of generating a student ID number for them instead of the personnel rep in the department doing it, which is required with the scholar option.